You can say what you want, get your head down. Every time I wanna leave, you treat me like a clown. But things are changing now, I'm getting out this house. Break it down, break it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Three Left Turns podcast. This week with one left turn because scheduling conflicts. I don't know, it happens, but it's okay. We're going to get through this, whether this turns out to be a full hour episode or not. You'll probably know by the timeline. If you're looking at the YouTube video or on Spotify, you're probably going to go, no, didn't make it. He couldn't do it. Couldn't make it a full hour without Sagan and Steven. But we're a real podcast, so we come out weekly. Let's just get right into it. It's a week of depression. I'll be real with you folks. I don't even know. I figured I'd be jumping back in my old radio days where I kind of just talk to myself, and I really need to block the scene because I can't help but look up at myself, and really I should just look at the camera. But here's what we're looking at, folks. It was a rough weekend. Over the weekend, the United States military launched Operation Midnight Hammer, and essentially, if you're the one person in the world who somehow hasn't heard, we targeted three. And I say we as a collective of the United States. We collectively decided it's just so ridiculous, honestly. But we targeted three uranium nuclear enrichment centers, bases in Iran. Effectively, I believe a quote said that we pushed back Iran's nuclear capabilities by 3 to 5 years, which coincidentally is just long enough for them to say in 3 to 5 years that they're close enough to reopening another nuclear center, and so we're going to have to bomb that one too in about 5 years. Check back, see how that forecast goes. But honestly, that's just got everyone down. I don't think I've seen anyone happy about this situation. Honestly, I think the only one that I saw who was able to even pretend to smile through this whole thing was Pete Hegseth. His immediate, well, took a whole night for him to get there, but Pete Hegseth, he came out on television the following day in the morning, and he couldn't help but be his old TV self, and he said, our B-2 bombers were successfully able to infiltrate downtown Tehran, which was not a target, and he immediately walked it back on himself. He immediately said, I misspoke. It was actually the three bases that were targeted, and they were successful. But what do you even say to that? What do you even say to that man when he says that we had bombers in the downtown of a city they weren't even in? Now, luckily, he was able to catch himself and prevent himself from looking a fool. But honestly, what are you going to do? At that point, it's just a lost cause. And I think there's just not much hope right now. As of this recording, it came out that Iran has launched missiles back at U.S. military bases that are in the region. Quite literally immediately before clicking record, I saw that supposedly the Qatari government said that they were able to intercept those missiles. But by the time this comes out, who knows where we're going to be at. I considered not even talking about it, but honestly, it's the biggest story of the Trump presidency so far, so I couldn't just ignore it entirely. So more things to talk about with that is gas prices have already seen an increase. They had gone up before the strike had even officially happened. So I believe there was a 50-cent jump from what I saw in our local here in Erie. There was about a 50-cent jump in gas prices before the strike even happened. And now with the unrest and instability of the region, can only go up from here. But hey, Donald Trump in another classic turn, said, hey, keep those oil prices down. If you raise oil prices, you're giving in to the enemy. And then also told the Department of Energy to drill, baby, drill. So really, we're just cooking ourselves. And I like, this is one of those situations. Last week, I specifically wanted to kind of stay away from international affairs because what can I possibly add to the conversation? You know, there's not much that I think me, Sagan, Steven, or anybody else who would come on the show has to add to a foreign policy, especially regarding the peace in the Middle East. And it's just there's not much hope. I tried. I personally, I really did try and find a silver lining to the whole situation. A big peace advocate over here, though, so not much you can really say if you are to believe the claims that Iran was actively seeking to. You can't even pretend. Like, I think the idea that there would be an invasion of the United States is so, I don't want to say hyperbolic, but just it's so hard to comprehend the idea that a foreign nation would even attempt that, because you see, I guess it's interesting to think about the restraint that you see the police force in the United States against its own citizens is so unrestrained that if a foreign adversary were really to come into the United States, I think you see the police, the citizens, and that's not even including the military, which is already trillions of dollars more equipped than anyone else. But I think you would see that there's just not a lot of good that would come from invading the United States. And why would you really want to at this point? I think it's just silly. There is the idea, AOC, perhaps this is a silver lining, AOC has introduced articles of impeachment. The idea that the president stepped out of line, made a direct act of war, which perhaps another take is that Donald Trump said that this was a peacekeeping measure, you know? Launching bombers and missiles is a peacekeeping measure in his mind to really see where the president stands on the whole idea of what peace is. But in regards to the articles of impeachment, I fear that we are at a point where Donald Trump has shown himself to be untouchable. And like, this isn't even really regarding the ideas of like all of his other court cases from the past year to 10 years to 20 to decades long of allegations and court hearings and trials. And I think at this point he really is just untouchable from my point of view. I don't think that there's much that can be done to stop him. He kind of just gets to do what he wants, unfortunately, and it makes it really difficult to figure out what to do. I think I have to laugh through it all because it's just it's so incomprehensible to somebody who believes in the personal liberties of fellow people, and that doesn't include just like fellow citizens. I think that involves countries all around the world. I remember I had a thought as I was driving into work about how nobody likes living under oppression. And to go back to the U.S. police state as it exists right now, the oppression is becoming so unbearable that you see mass protests in the street, anytime an unjustifiable, unethical, or just downright unproductive. I think it's just the idea that everyone believes growing up that the police are there to protect and serve, and over again we've seen situations in which it's harder and harder to say that that is 100% what their job is, especially when you see them directly getting in line to do things that contradict the rights and freedoms of the people. And that doesn't just include protests, although I guess I am going to say basically the idea that if a union tries to go on strike and sets up a picket line, there are instances in which businesses have been able to contract the police to break it up. And when you look at that style of oppression and you see that the police state exists solely for, I shouldn't say solely, but a lot of times it is so obvious that the police state exists for the defense of and insurance of corporate America and the wealthiest business owners, that it makes it hard to understand why anyone would believe in the idea of a rule of law, especially when the leaders of that party, the party in control, just have such a lack of respect for the rule of law. And this is something that, like, obviously I'm going to be jumping around a whole lot as I try and compile my own thoughts into this episode, but I think when it really boils down to that idea of not living in an oppressive state, for years, Iran and many other countries have expressed that the influence of American power in the region, and never has this been more exhibited than in Israel, that whether or not you want to believe the idea that Israel is acting in its own, it's a fairy tale land to imagine that Israel is acting of its own volition, considering it's almost entirely bankrolled by the United States military and United States government. But when you see that Israel is kind of just operating as a political attack dog agent in the region while carrying out a genocide, it breaks my heart to imagine that there are people in this country who don't, I don't even want to say people in the country, people in power, people in government who truly believe that this is what the American people want. And I think if you were to really break that down, I don't think there's a single politician who believes that this is what the American people want. American politicians have, for decades, looked at policies that are popular among Americans and actively run away from them. They've actively drifted towards the right in a lot of situations, a lot of the time catering to fascist narratives, especially like looking after moments of loss for the country. Of course, after 9/11, you have the Patriot Act, and you see that the surveillance state just grows and grows. And I think it's interesting that no matter where you are in the world, you have to comprehend with the scope and power of the United States, whether you want to engage with them or not, whether you are your own sovereign country, and I guess to get back to that idea of like living under oppression and freedom, the idea of a nation having its own sovereign state requires the non-intervention of the United States. And I think there are very few places in the world, I think it'd be hard-pressed to find a single place in the world in which the United States has not actively intervened or attempted to intervene with a government. Like, genuinely, but just thinking about it right now, I can't think of it. I can't think of a place off the top of my head right now. This isn't necessarily something I plan to talk about, but I can't think of a single place in the world in which foreign nations have not had to deal with U.S. intervention, whether it be militarily, economically, or just, I would say socially, but I feel like the first two really cover almost every single base. It's unheard of to not have to deal with the rule of law from the United States. And I think I can, at least at the very least, I feel like I'm carrying along this tradition of jumping around a lot on the podcast. I'm gonna enter into the parasocialist moment here after that 15 minutes of doom and gloom. But I am coming off a 16-hour shift. Like I said, unfortunately, the two co-stars, the main leads of the show, are unable to make it due to the unforeseen scheduling conflicts we have. But hopefully we will reunite next week and all be back together. To stay in this parasocialist, I'm going to talk about my life for the past week and do some shout outs here. But I had a terrible time at the beach. I have this funny story. In college, I used to be a radio host at the local college station, and to fill time, to be an entertaining radio host, I used to just tell stories about things I used to do, whether they be true or not. And something that was always a popular thing to throw to, I guess, was talking about going to Presque Isle and going to the beach. I'm going to be so real with you. In all the years that I went to college, I went to the beach at Presque Isle maybe twice, and never did I actually talk about those times on the radio. It's something that it was so easy to go, hey, it's nice warm weather we're having. Maybe you'll join me down at the beach. I plan on going there this weekend. Was never going to do it. And my parents personally thought it was so funny because they would listen to the show, and then afterwards they would go, so you went to the beach this weekend? Like, that's cool. How was it? And I would go, I didn't go to the beach. What are you talking about? Because it was such like a throwaway thing for me during the show. And I just, I think this comes to mind because we're in the middle of the first big heat wave of the summer, and it's definitely cracking down. But I went to the beach. It got so sunburned. I'm so red. Oh my gosh, we were only there for like 2 hours, realistically, and I'm red. I'm red under this shirt. I don't know if you can really tell it on my face here. I feel like the lighting really bleaches me out just a bit, but I'm pretty red, pretty burnt. In other news, to throw back to something that happened approximately 12 episodes ago, we were talking about Bronny James, LeBron's kid who's also in the NBA right now, and I made the joke that he was going to have a future seat on the bench of the Pacers, I believe. Now, at the time, the Pacers had barely cracked the top 10 in the Eastern Conference. They were not looking that good of a team. Historically, they have not been that standout of a team, and in the past couple of years. And so I thought it would be a fun little joke. And then slowly my fears were coming true as the Pacers had an incredible January into February. They started rising, and they made it all the way to the NBA Finals, and it all culminated in the Game 7, the OKC Thunder against the Indiana Pacers. Who was going to take it out? Was I going to have the worst look of all time by saying that Bronny would cut it on the bench of an NBA Finals and possibly NBA championship team? No, they came in second. They did lose to the Thunder, but it was close. And while I'm still pretty embarrassed of that take, I do think if you go back and in the context of the time in which I said that they would have this, where they ranked in the league at the time, I'd like to claim that it was a good joke at the time. It's no longer a good joke. It's aged poorly. But I think at that point we can just call it rage bait, maybe. If somebody were to go back and watch, I think, episode 3, it might have been the first episode for all I remember. I don't even know. It was in a conversation about LeBron James and Michael Jordan, and it was really out of like a sports conversation. A sports conversation on this show doesn't happen very much, but it's luckily I got to avoid that embarrassment. But in terms of something I did enjoy watching, which was not the NBA Finals of the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, friend of the show, Morge Gucci, check him out on Twitch. He started streaming. He's so entertaining. He's very funny to watch. He can rant about pretty much everything. It's you can get him started on anything retro, whether it be TV or video games or music. I'll be real, I don't know about the retro music taste, but in terms of just niche music, this guy can go on and on. You can find him, I think, on TikTok at George Music. Maybe I'll put a link in here, I don't know. But Twitch, Morge Gucci, check him out. He's incredible. He's been playing a lot of fun games. I think we even co-streamed one night, but I don't think it was very good because I don't think anyone was necessarily ready to all stream a game together. But he's been really entertaining. I haven't been able to watch for the past couple of days because I've been pulling a bunch of double shifts at work, so I haven't checked him out for the past couple of days. But I hope he streams tonight. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I did have the thought where if I record this episode by myself, it should be way easier to edit, and I think it will be. And I figured it might finally be time to have an intro song, which I wanted to pull from some of our friend Morge Gucci's music. And I reached out to him. This is before the show even started, and I reached out to him, and then, much like the rest of the entire project of this podcast, it's been kind of something on the back burner for me. It hasn't been a top priority necessarily to make sure that I get an intro song for the show. That's why there's always like 4 seconds of silence, because I just have like the little logo pop up and then it fades into us. But now that I have a week where it's just me, maybe you'll know if I succeeded by if you heard an intro song at the beginning. So it's I think that's really where all the positivity grinds to a halt, because I do know, to go back to the whole Iran situation and conflict, and I think there's what I found when, I want to say it was on Face the Nation, I watched this interview happen, but they were talking about whether or not the United States was already at war with Iran. And like I said earlier, Trump has claimed that these were missile strikes to enforce peace. And I think that there's been a commentary online about how the idea of a lot of military strength and military power has revolved around the idea of leading through strength, or the what's the old Teddy Roosevelt quote about the speak softly and carry a big stick. I believe that was him. The idea that the American power influence, the need for them to be the security state of the world, has backed the country into a corner in which the idea that anyone else develops military might is a direct threat to the United States shows the self-induced fear and I think it shows that the United States has invested so little in infrastructure or just like peace negotiations, treaties, keeping the developed world on the good side of the United States has been so far on the back burner for decades that it makes it hard to imagine a world in which it doesn't feel like every interaction between the United States and another country isn't one filled with tense negotiations, whether it be a country in the Middle East, in Asia, or even just Canada. I feel like every conversation that happens between Trump and the Prime Minister of Canada feels like a threat, and that's messed up. I don't understand why there's this whole idea that the United States needs to be the global police state. It's infuriating, and it just puts me at a loss for words. One of the other stories that just came out today, I believe, was that Trump has started to do a just asking questions debate lord style about the idea of a regime change in Iran, which, let's not forget, the U.S. helped influence decades ago. The idea that Trump wants to try and influence a regime change in a sovereign nation and is just publicly stating it shows not only that the man is unfit for foreign talks, just as much as this podcast probably is, but that he just has such a disrespect for the sovereignty of others that he doesn't even think it would be possible to make peace with the nation as it exists today. And I mean, at this point, I feel like it's kind of hard to disagree with that statement. I think the United States isn't unable to create lasting partnerships with other countries, but because it feels that it always needs to be on the upper hand of a agreement, we can see this with the failed tariffs that, a country has a percentage tariff on the United States, we're going to double it. The idea that the United States needs to constantly be one-upping every other nation has put them into a position where, while we are the, quote, wealthiest nation in the world, you see such wealth disparity between the people and its bourgeois. to get all leftist about it, the wealth inequality is just completely at odds with the interests of the nation, because while the ruling class is doing everything it can to exploit not only American workers but resources across the planet in areas that are so resource dense, and yet you see the people that live in those areas living in even more poverty filled life than what we see here in the United States. It just shows how evil these people are. I mean, when you look at the when you I this could be a jump right here, but when you look at the assassination of Brian Thompson, allegedly by Luigi Mangione, allegedly, we don't know. That gun could have been planted. Who knows? But when you look at the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO, there was an immediate response by the public that felt to me almost like a relief, like a finally something was done, and it just shows that I think that disdain for a ruling class is strong enough and is in a situation in which you could see that the American people don't want to be the global police state. They do not want to see themselves constantly being the most evil, vile version of what a country that claims to have the ideals and morals that it teaches pretends to teach, when you see everyone in government doing the opposite. And I think in the current state of affairs, you see like the right wing of politics is currently the leaders, right? Like it's the idea that Republicans are constantly and chronically doing everything they can to project themselves as strong-willed or wealthy, intelligent, all of these things. And I mean, the wealthy part, kind of hard to argue with, but at the same time, when you look at what some of their political base is, you see that it's some of the poorest Americans that are trying to support because they believe in that supposed American dream that one day if we all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, then that's what we're looking for. That's the way that we can all become millionaires, in a situation in which I don't remember what that exact stat is, but I believe it's 90% of Americans are 3 bad months away from living in poverty, whereas it could take you centuries to even begin to glimpse the wealth that people in the top 5%, not even just 1%, but what some of the top 5%, when you see the statistic of millions of millionaires, I forget who I was listening to, or there was an ad, I believe, for, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I'll have to put the graphic up on the screen. I'm causing work for myself. But Warren Buffett's like hedge fund or stock management program, they just had a commercial that was talking about how millions of millionaires have trillions of dollars invested through Charles Schwab. That's what it was, in Charles Schwab. And just the idea that there are millions of millionaires investing in Charles Schwab, whereas you have the average American struggling to pay rent and buy groceries at the same time. How wealthy of a nation are we? And at the cost of doing what? Launching wars in countries that we could never. I can't say that anyone has necessarily ever talked about Iran or Afghanistan or Iraq being, what's the word? Vacation hotspots, but the idea that the cost it would be for me to fly to the Middle East and just experience the culture there is something that is so far out of a price range And I know that there are probably people who would say that that would be a dangerous thing to do. But if we took a minute to think about why that would be dangerous, why is the idea of, I want to say like an American, but just the idea that like being in a militarized area that has had to militarize in direct response to the United States intervention in the region. It's a self-defeating game that we've played, and I think that there's no way in which Americans can comprehend the idea, and you see it with immigration just here in the United States, that there are people who are traveling across borders hundreds of miles in the hopes and the idea to find a better life in America. And at the same time, you see the national level of happiness, however we determine that, but you see that the number of satisfied citizens has dropped decade over decade. We have that classic stat that I feel like every single I don't know why they're pretending to do it, but you see mainstream media talk about how for the first time in the past 100, 200, 300 years, maybe in the United States ever, that the current generation of young adults are worse off than their parents before them. And there's an untold number of factors that have gone into that. But when you look at the opportunities that were afforded to generations previously, you see a higher rate of union membership, you see a higher rate of political diversification, you see that there was just the idea of, for weeks now, I've been trying to find a way to work this into the conversation, and maybe I can finally do it, that I have nothing but the microphone all to myself. But to go back to Ezra Klein's most recent book, Abundance, and I've seen a lot of conversation around it. The United States had its highest rate of growth when we were investing in ourselves. When companies were investing in building factories and building schools in the United States rather than outsourcing that to anyone they possibly could. And while I don't think it's, I've always kind of been a little confused about the right approach for this. While I don't think it's wrong to approach talent in other nations, because I think the diversification of talent is important, I think it's more about where the capital is coming from. Because, sure, labor is cheaper in other nations, which, from a basic standpoint, shows that workers in the United States are getting paid more, which is a good thing. But at the same time, by the labor being cheaper in other countries, I think that there's been a I feel like I talked about it with like that solar panel conversation we had a couple weeks ago, but the idea that like because the labor is cheaper, the quality is cheaper, and I don't think that's always wrong. That certainly is probably true in many situations, but when you look at the quality of American products, I think that when you think about that conversation of American products being better, it not only is a classic representation of the idea of American exceptionalism, and I feel like I've beaten that horse dead over and over again about the idea that Americans believe that they are living in the best country in the world and no other country can top it. But at the same time, that has sprung. I don't know. I feel like it could be a chicken or the egg sort of situation between isolationism and that idea of American exceptionalism, and they probably go hand in hand to a certain point, very far. You can't really talk about one without the other. But you saw that Donald Trump ran his 2024 campaign basically advocating for isolationism, and you saw that he might as well have done a read my lips, no new wars. I think it could be one of the greatest sound bites of all time, the no new taxes. But at the same time, Donald Trump going on and on about how there would be no new wars, and and less than 6 months into his presidency, it's very possible that we're staring down the barrel of another Middle East war that we've now seen for the past 45 years. I mean, this is one of those things where, again, at what point do I have the qualifications to talk about this? I've barely lived long enough to see what came before. But like, as long as I have been alive, the United States has had an active military presence in the Middle East. An active military police everywhere in the world, but specifically in the Middle East, there has been such a focus, and in whether it be Islamophobia that leads to this, whether it be I think it's kind of disingenuous to not say that it's almost entirely just on the resources of the region and the oil and the exploitation of the region for that reason, but really the idea that there's anywhere in the world, God, I'm lost. The idea that there's pretty much anything in the world, to go back to that idea of like being able to avoid American influence, the fact that while the rest of the world is almost forced to deal with the United States, almost always for the worse, people here in the United States, while again we claim we're one of the unhappiest nations in the world, are looking at claiming that we're the best in the world. And this idea of isolationism has sort of broken up. I feel like we've touched on it in many ways, but like the idea of isolationism has not only extended from outside of our borders, but has broken up communities and groups and the American diaspora as a whole by constantly pitting a them, by always having a us versus them dynamic. It has made it nearly impossible to come together, because the them has always been culture war. It's never been class consciousness. To jump to the Luigi Mangione story, I think for the first time somebody saw, Americans saw, that millionaires can bleed red. They bleed the same blood that we have. And I feel like we're touching on dangerous levels of extremism right now. And I'm not advocating for violence at all. But when you see that I don't even know if I finished that point yet earlier that I was trying to make, but the right wing of politics tries to solve so many things through suppression and violence, whereas the left wing and I don't even want to say that, the liberal wing, I should say, the Democratic Party, solves everything through what feels to me like a hushing of major issues and celebrating tiny victories in a way that makes them feel more important than they really are. Because, I mean, to think of the past 20 years, the most progressive things that have been done at the federal level is an attempt at protections. See, this isn't even... When you look at the most progressive things that the United States has done, we're really talking about gay marriage. And during Pride Month, what a way to bring it up. But, like, we've seen social securities and social welfare programs gradually declining. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can talk about, like, Obamacare as a win. But again, since its inception, Republicans have been attempting to deteriorate everything from the bones out. It doesn't just stop at trying to... Republicans have just done everything they can to try and break that apart, and in many ways have been so successful that while the program is still good on a whole, it almost feels like it does need to go away for something better to replace it. Of course, Republicans don't have an answer for that. Democrats barely have an answer on how to defend it. So I think the hope of that is kind of lost. But I just don't... I don't have... That's just one of those things where I just do not have an answer for. So I kind of spiraled into a doom and gloom to a point where it got so bad that I'm just gonna do a full reset. And some other stories that came out that I think are kind of positive, just completely getting away from whatever I was talking about to really bring it home here. The other stories I got, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, the Three Left Turns podcast broke the story on the potential of Ozempic and the other ones that I can't remember, Wegovy, the potentially decreasing the effectiveness of birth control for women, and showing that there has potentially been an uptick in unwanted pregnancies by women who are on these digestion suppressors. I can't really say it. That's a tongue twister right there. Digestion suppressors. Digestion suppressors. Say that 7 times fast and record it and post it and send it back to us. But these women who are on digestion suppressors that have seen their birth control potentially become ineffective with a lower efficacy rate. That's what I'm looking for. But at the same time, good news, fellas. Ozempic penis is real. You are now able to see a growth. Now, this growth is mostly just the existing organ that is there, but now the surrounding area is less. So it makes you feel more. And isn't that just great, fellas? We got another thing going for us that just huge. I feel I need to apologize for the previously made joke. I feel it was such a bad pun that I'm going to be forced to end the episode soon. Or early, I guess. But another story that I do think is slightly enlightening. You've heard me, Steven, and Sagan all talk about how the hopelessness of the housing market. We've kind of been talking about the story about how for the first time in a couple years, we've seen that there are more houses on the market than there are buyers, which in theory should lower prices, but hasn't. But at the same time, one of the evil companies that has influenced this housing market, Zillow, is currently under an antitrust lawsuit in which Zillow. This is such a crazy. It feels like it should be such an open and shut case, but I'm sure the lawyers are gonna have a field day with it, and somehow it's gonna end up with Zillow just continuing to exist as a monopoly. But there's been a case filed because Zillow has in its terms of service the idea that if you were to post your listing, so basically posting your house anywhere else, violates Zillow's terms of service. Effectively, as the largest home, I don't want to say seller, but home buying influencer website in the country, has essentially created itself to be a monopoly, and someone is finally trying to do something about it. They've been trying to break it apart for years now, but with the investment from private equity and everything that's coming together, I once again, it feels like it should be such an open and shut case by saying that listing your home or your apartment or your property or your land or really anything on Zillow and listing it somewhere else is a violation of the terms of service of Zillow and would see like any sort of business that you're trying to do with them be voided is just so ridiculous, and there's no way. It feels like there should be no possible way forward for them to continue that practice. Check back in 4 weeks when we have an update on how Zillow has actually cornered everything and has bought Apartments.com and everywhere else. I almost feel like Apartments.com is probably like a secret shell company of Zillow. I have no evidence of this, and I'm not going to do the research to look it up. But tell me I'm wrong. You know what I'm saying? But all right. With that, I mean, we're probably about 10 minutes short, but I've kind of talked myself in circles, talked myself into a point where I don't have much. I didn't have enough ammunition in the tank to make it the whole way across the finish line. So, with that, let's just say thank you to you who watched. If you actually made it through this episode, you listened to me and just me talk for the past 50-ish minutes. Incredible. I can't do it. I listen to everything we make at 1.5x speed minimum. That's not true. At least 1.2 though usually. But when I'm editing, I usually throw it into 1.5 to 2 depending on the conversation and how well I remember it. So thank you to Community Access Media for providing the space here where we get to film every single week. It's such a great resource here in the community. If you are interested in looking into anything, you can go onto their website at camerie.org, I believe. I'll double check it. And I thank you to you for watching. Maybe you'll hear an outro song to match the intro song. Maybe I've talked myself into a corner that I have to do it now, and you get to enjoy something that will now be a permanent staple of the podcast. See you next week.
You can say what you want, get your head down. Get it out now.